We're going to talk about how to convert fractions to decimals, decimals to percents, percents to decimals, and all kinds of combinations like that. So the first one we're going to talk about is how to convert fractions to decimals. Okay, fractions to decimals. So I have a fraction here. I'm actually going to erase this. I have a fraction here, and I want to convert it to a decimal. Okay, so how do I convert it to a decimal? The easiest way to convert it to a decimal, since you can use a calculator, is to use a calculator. Okay, and what you're going to do, if you have a calculator or not, is you're going to take 3, and then you have to ask yourself, what does that bar mean? Does it mean add, subtract, multiply, or divide? It means divide, so you're going to take 3 divided by 4. Okay, you're going to take 3 divided by 4. I'm going to do that on the calculator, and when I take 3 divided by 4, I get 0.75. So that would be my decimal. Okay? Now, how do I take a decimal and make a percent out of it? Okay? When you make a percent out of a decimal, you take the decimal point, wherever the decimal point is, and move it 2 to the right. 2 to the right. Because a percent is out of 100, so it's kind of like multiplying by 100 to make your percent. So we're going to move this 2 to the right, 1, 2. So we would get, instead of 0.75, we would get 75%. 75%. Okay? Let's try another one. Let's say we start with a percentage now. Okay, start with a percentage now. And let's make it into a decimal. Let's make it into a decimal. So instead of going from a decimal to a percent, you're gonna go from a percent to a decimal. When we went from a decimal to a percent, we moved the decimal point 2 to the right. When we go from a percent to a decimal, we're gonna move it 2 to the left. Okay, so you're going to find the decimal point. If you can't see a decimal point, if it's not in sight, it's on the right. So our decimal point would be right here, because there was no decimal point, and we're going to move it 2 to the left. So instead of 32%, we have 0.32. 0.32. Now let's say we want to make that decimal into a fraction. Okay, this is when you need to know what your place values are. So this 3 is in the tenths place. This 2 is in the hundredths place. The reason it's in the hundredths place is because when we make this decimal into a fraction, we're going to take 32. We're just going to take the number, and we're going to put it over. Since 2 is in the hundredths place, we're going to put it over 100. Okay? So this would make a fraction, and then we can reduce this fraction. So 32 reduces by 2, okay, to 16 over 50, because 32 divided by 2 is 16, 100 divided by 2 is 50. Still can be reduced, so we're going to divide it again by 2, because the reason I'm dividing by 2 is because it's an even, both of them are even numbers. 16 divided by 2 is 8. 50 divided by 2 is 25. And so our reduced fraction would be 8 over 25. Okay, so we went from 32% to a decimal of 0.32 to a fraction of 8 over 25. Okay, let's try one more. Let's start with a decimal. Same thing. Let's go 1.08. 1.08. So if we change this decimal into a percent, we would still move the decimal 2 to the right. So 1, 2. So instead of 1.08, we would have 108%. 108%. Let's say we had that decimal and we wanted to make it into a fraction, okay? Well, this 8 is again in the hundredths place, so we're gonna put 108 all over 100, and then we're gonna have to reduce it, okay? So I'm gonna reduce this by 2. So 108 divided by 2 is 54 over 100 divided by 2 is 50. I'm going to reduce by 2 again because they're both even. 54 divided by 2 is 27. 50 divided by 2 is 25. So now I can't reduce it anymore. So this is an improper fraction because the numerator is bigger than the denominator, so I'm going to divide it by 27 divided by 25, and I'm going to get 1 and 2 over 25. So my answer would be 1 and 2 over 25. So the reason I had a mixed number is because I had a number out here that was greater than 0. Okay, so this is how you go from fractions to decimals to percents, or percents to decimals to fractions, or from decimals to percents, or from decimals to fractions, mixed numbers. Okay, so hopefully this video helps. There's also a lot of videos on Khan Academy that are on your links for, they're on your practice schedule. I would encourage you to watch those because it goes through examples if you didn't understand this, or maybe rewatch this again, okay? If you have questions, please let me know. Otherwise, show me your notes when you are finished.